My name is Ginny, also known as 2/3 Lotus, everywhere on the internet. This clip is part of my series, The Poets of Twitch, where I analyze my viewers' writing live on stream. Nothing has been edited out, so you're seeing this exactly as streamed with all of the imperfections and tangents that come with being live. If you want to catch me live or want more information, check out the description. Otherwise, enjoy some excellent writing. Unknowing. I wish I knew anything Knew anything at all. Whenever I think I know a street, there's a new pothole. Oh, whenever I think I know a street, there's a new pothole. With every epiphany is a new question. With every solution, there is a new problem. I wish I knew what I thought about any of it. I wish upon every star that sprinkles the endless sky like sand that someday I might understand this machine beyond the blood bones. No magnifying glass can see the soul. No mirror can reflect thoughts. Perhaps we are the most foolish fools who ever fooled. Perhaps we are internally blind. But every time I think I understand the gears that turn my hopes and desires and fears and rages, I find that they were never cogs at all. It seems every time I blink, my mind is a new Salvador Dali painting, waiting to be analyzed before it morphs again. And I do not dare phantom trying to tame it. Those who claim to have tamed their hearts and minds, I believe, are lying, or never had ones that worked in the first place. For the mind is an animal, and the heart is a beast, and we must fight, not to be the prey. Unknowing by GhostlyAnnGraves. Welcome in, King Poyo. We have not gotten to your submission yet. Things go slow. There are many. It's just the nature of things. Unknowing by GhostlyAnnGraves. To be read again. You have a lovely, dramatic reading voice. I appreciate that, GhostlyAnnGraves. I have practiced it in some capacity, at very least in the matter of reading a lot of poems out loud by a lot of people, and also going up on stage and stuff. So thank you. Unknowing by GhostlyAnnGraves. I wish I knew anything at all. Whenever I think I know a street, there's a new pothole. With every epiphany is a new question. With every solution, there is a new problem. I wish I knew what I thought about any of it. I wish upon every star that sprinkles the endless sky like sand that someday I might understand this machine beyond the blood bones. No magnifying glass can see the soul. No mirror can reflect thoughts. Perhaps we are the most foolish fools who ever fooled. Perhaps we are internally blind. But every time I think I understand the gears that turn my hopes and desires and fears and rages, I find they were never cogs at all. It seems every time I blink, my mind is a new Salvador Dali painting, waiting to be analyzed before it morphs again. And I do not dare phantom trying to tame it. Those who claim to have tamed their hearts and minds, I believe, are lying, or never had ones that worked in the first place. For the mind is an animal, and the heart is a beast, and we must fight, not to be the prey. Unknowing by GhostlyAnnGraves. I like it. On the first glance, you don't have to spell out Salvador Dali. You can just say melting clocks or something. That's interesting. Seems like every time I blink in my mind, there is a new... You could even do like a new, quotes, melting clocks, waiting to be analyzed. You could also do like a new Dali, no Salvador, no painting. This would like be more sort of linguistically efficient, because we refer to like a Dali painting as a Dali. Or if you wanted to say Salvador Dali, because I kind of like the whole name. It feels nice. I like the name. It could just be a new Salvador Dali. Those are all, that's a valid criticism, Pilsner Grip. And I don't think it's bad how it is. But I think one of the best ways we can sort of provide criticism, which I'm not going to jump into much more of until later, but a great way to criticize poems is to find words that feel extraneous, because we like every word having a purpose, every word connecting to something, or finding a word that doesn't connect, where we could have a word that connects to something else, to a metaphor, to an idea, to a theme. This is like generally something we do, or could do. There is not really a should in poetry. Just my mind, instead of citing the name, reference their work. Yeah. So the way, if we were to do that, just to sort of finish the thought, seems every time I blink, my mind is a new melting clocks, waiting. And then that's like a weird sentence. And I think you already have some like weird sentences that feel very like nice and like I like them, like foolish fools whoever fooled, right? I do not dare phantom trying to tame it. And I think melting clocks, very interestingly, works extremely well with your reference of machines and cogs, and this relates to the clocks, right? Because clocks have gears and stuff. So then if you have the clocks melting, it actually points back to your idea of the cogs in your mind that are not cogs. So that's actually like super cool. Specifically that you mentioned that painting, Pilsner Grip. Like melting clocks would be a very cool thing to use in this poem. You could also like use melting clocks up here in the cog part, which is here. Salvador Dali painting also sort of already references melting clocks. It's one of his most famous paintings, right? But if we want to do this, like something we could actually do, Dali paintings. I've seen one Dali in real life, and his work is beautiful. Yeah, so we have multiple melting clocks. This is like a big thing. Gosh, I love his art. I should own a Dali someday. The one I saw is probably nowhere near the top of these. It has like an island or a boat or something. Jeez, he has so much cool stuff. But I think like the poem, like not knowing what is real, right, could be kind of cool to lean into Dali. And you already use him, so like you've done something well. But like we could definitely like use Dali more, and that might be a cool thing. We'll see. Depends on what do you look for, but you want more people to relate. I think more people relate to the image of melting clocks or another painting than the name itself. Yeah, I think the pulling back on the specificity and not like if we okay, we're jumping into the specificity graph again. So here is the specificity graph going something like that, right? This axis is how specific we are. This is the number of interpretations our reader may have. Okay? The more specific, the closer it gets to the reader only being able to interpret like one thing from our poem. Right? Yeah, we haven't even like started looking at the poem itself, but I think this is like good to think about. Like Pilsner Grip, since you are actively like doing analysis and critique in chat, I definitely want to engage with that, right? So we don't lose it, because it's very valid. So if we are more specific, let's say we say melting clocks. This is more specific than just saying Dali, because Dali has many paintings. And there's an advantage and a disadvantage to both of these. So this one, we are more likely that they get to the interpretation of, let's say, connecting the clocks and the cogs and time and losing it, sort of. And this is like a really cool realization. When I like put those two things together, I'm like, that's awesome, right? I think that's cool and it's beautiful. Now, if you leave it at Salvador Dali, it is possible for your reader to still make this connection, right? There's only going to be more options of interpretation, but they might have some different interpretation based on like another painting. Now, this is like kind of good. Like, let's say someone who really likes Dali reads this poem and has a favorite piece that is not the melting clocks, and they, with their agency as a reader, relate the poem to a different Dali. This is going to be more effort on your reader and require more knowledge, but be more fulfilling for them. Whereas this, the more specific, is going to be more broadly understandable, but it makes your reader's life a little bit easier, but it gives less of that like treat, that reward for your close reader, right? Neither of these are wrong. Also, welcome, High Caliber. I didn't say hi when you came in. You slept a lot. That's good. And something about the specificity graph is generally as interpretations go up, understandability can go down. This is an evolution of the specificity graph. We've never done the second graph. So, interpretations, understanding. Okay? When we have a lot of interpretations, it's going to be more difficult to understand the poem. There's more to parse. There's more things to figure out. It puts more on your reader. As we get less interpretations, it's going to get easier to understand because if it's sort of obvious, right? So the graph goes something like this. Get rid of that. Okay. The graph goes something, I just got rid of that, like this, right? And if you have exactly one perfect interpretation that is like specifically clear, right? You're going to end up with like everyone understanding your poem because it's simple. And then you have to ask the question, maybe the impossible graph of understanding of your reader against quality, right? And what does that graph look like? Because some readers like a poem that they don't understand and challenges them. Namely, Ginny, also known as 2/3 Lotus on the internet, likes a poem that is not understandable, thinks it is high quality. There are some people who, if they don't understand a poem, though, will not like it. And I generally like all the poems, so like this is probably the graph. A writer friend of mine once gave me the advice to spell out what you want people to know, but only hint at what you want them to figure out. Yeah, that's really good. Oh, I like that. Yeah. So, spell out what you want them to know. Because, like, requisite knowledge is important in a piece, right? I wish I knew anything at all. This is like a great start because it sums up the entire poem, and this is like what the reader needs to know. And then with everything else, the connection of the melting clocks, you can hint at it more vaguely, Salvador Dali, and I think even mentioning the melting clocks is still not telling them. It is still sort of hinting, because you have to make the connection of clocks, gears, cogs, melting, and it is still like a satisfying thing to figure out and make those connections. It's just a question of how you see your reader and how you want to treat them. But this is interesting. Number of interpretations. I mean, as it relates to like actually like clarity of interpretation, like this isn't even number. It's like if the interpretations are very clear, it can be here, because you can have a very whatever. It sounds like my critique of Arrival. You think it tells too much, that movie? I have watched Arrival. I thought it was pretty decent. I like linguistics. Linguistics in the media, you don't get that much. Let's get back to the text, though, right? I wish I knew anything at all. Okay, the end spelled out too much. I wish I knew anything at all. Whenever I think I know a street, there's a new pothole. With every epiphany, a question. With every solution, a problem. So this is sort of a nice, like, reiteration here. Repetition. And it just reinforces, it doesn't reinforce, it clarifies the idea, right? I wish I knew anything at all. Well, like, your reader is going to say, well, you know something. Like, you have knowledge. And then this clarifies what you mean very immediately. And it's probably good to do that, because it seems like you want the reader to clearly understand the nature of your unknowing. I would say this is very clear. And if you want the nature of your unknowing to be less clear and more hinted at, then this probably needs to, like, change, right? But it's still it is good as a description. Whenever I think I know a street, there's a new pothole. Things change. We cannot escape change. With every epiphany, there's a new question, right? The more we know, the more we connect, the more we want to ask more questions. With every solution, we find problems. It's unending. A treadmill. A knowledge treadmill. Like a hedonic treadmill. But knowledge, right? It kind of feels like we're going forward on the treadmill, right? Because we're like running and stuff, right? Or whatever. Drawing a stick figure running is hard. We're running on the treadmill or something, right? And it feels like we're going forward and we are just staying in the same place. This is your sort of unknowing, right? I've never written mysterious poetry. It's always just exposits of being put into pretty words. And that's good too. I think the words are very pretty, right? And you yourself had this advice taken about making certain things less spelled out, right? And it is absolutely something that applies to poetry as well. And that's good advice for probably any art in general. Give your reader what they need to know, and then what you want them to figure out, you hint at. I wish I knew what I thought about any of it. This is like a fun line, because you say like, well, I wish I knew anything at all, and you describe the nature of your unknowing. And this means like, okay, well, maybe this person actually kind of does. The subject of this poem does have some understanding of their situation, but they don't know how to feel about the way that their thoughts work, right? So it adds like another layer of uncertainty, which is cool. I wish upon every star that sprinkles the endless sky like sand, pretty, that someday I might understand this machine beyond the blood bones. So, understanding the body and not the mind, right? The heart versus the mind. The blood, the bones, against the knowledge. This is the big, like, dichotomy in this poem. The mind, the physical. I need a symbol for dichotomous. This is my symbol. This represents the dichotomy of two things. I've been wanting to have a certain notation for some of my analysis, and this is the first symbol in the dictionary. Dichotomy. Two things that are separate, opposite, cannot coexist. Well, they can coexist, but they are in opposition. Right? Hot and cold is a dichotomy. Right? And so, or it can be used as a dichotomy. Hot and cold is also the spectrum where there's neutral, lukewarm in between. But the mind and the body is sort of this dichotomy within the poem. Take my advice with a huge grain of salt. When I write, I don't really think. And the less I think, the more I like it after. This is an absolutely reasonable approach. Not thinking while writing is a good option. I don't think, given how much I think about people's writing, you might be surprised that I don't think that much when I write. I kind of just put words on the page. And there's a lot of things that I've described in analysis that now clarify the way that I can put words on the page, but it almost gets internalized. That's why I think analysis is important. You do it a lot, you internalize the things you analyze, and then you reflect them back in your own art. No magnifying glass can see the soul. No mirror can reflect thoughts. And I like this. This is actually a continuation of our dichotomy, because we have the magnifying glass as a physical thing, we have the mirror as a physical thing, the mind, and then we have the body, the physical thing, the body, right? But the body as physicality. Magnifying glass and mirror cannot reflect the mind, the soul, the thoughts. And this does a great job of reinforcing this theme that you're starting to build through. Perhaps we are the most foolish fools who ever fooled. And this is probably just a wise statement. This is very Socratic, right? The only thing I know is that I do not know. That it might be of use to you to go look at reading some of Socrates I haven't read that much Socrates, but he talked a lot about not knowing. Perhaps we are internally blind. Blind. Vision. Physical. Seeing objects. We cannot see the internal, i.e., the mind. But every time I think I understand the gears that turn my hopes, desires, fears, rages. I like gears and fears here. I think it's like a cool rhyme because you give some space. I find that they were never cogs at all. And this is like the illusion. We want the mind to work like a system. We want it to work like a machine. We want it to make sense. And then it doesn't. When we try to put these like mechanical impositions onto the way it works. And it's really frustrating. And this is like a trap that just gets fallen into all the time. I have a poem that's about, in some ways, or similar to this like mind-body idea. I won't say more than that in terms of explanation. I can maybe read it later in this analysis. I have it memorized mostly, maybe not. It seems that every time I blink, my mind is a new Salvador Dali painting. So, first of all, I think saying that it is a Dali speaks to Dali's style. And this is one of the ways that talking about this as a Dali is advantageous to saying something like melting clocks. Because this is like the surrealism, right? Where if you talked about the melting clocks, people might make the cog connection immediately and not think about Dali as more broadly a surrealist painter. So now you look at your mind as something that is shifting, strange, melting, fluid. Something you can look at, analyze, and then somehow watch change in its surreal nature into something entirely different. I think Dali paintings are certainly not still. Analysis is an imposition of this sort of stillness. This verb relates, it feels, to like the body in this poem, because analysis is the machine. We want to take art, and this even speaks more broadly, take art and put it into something that makes sense, a little box. This is what I love to do, clearly. I'm trying to make a career out of it, right? and so we try to analyze the Dali, and then we look back up at it and it feels entirely different. So this is an argument for keeping it as Dali. We could definitely do, seems each time I blink, my mind is a new Dali waiting to be analyzed. If we want to like not spell out the whole thing, a new Salvador Dali waiting to be analyzed. And like I do really like the melting clocks like thing. You could write somewhere in here that like the cogs melt, right? Away. Like find that they were never cogs at all. This is where you could maybe take some of Pilsner Grip's advice and say like they melt into nothing at all, but also them never existing at all is probably reasonable for this poem, because that's like the illusion of trying to create that structure, create that analysis, create that machine, that body. And I do not dare phantom, trying to tame it. This is like beautifully non-grammatical right? I do not dare phantom trying to tame it. Dare the phantom, dare phantoms, but dare phantom trying to tame it is not like grammatical. But I like this. I like this. Sometimes things that are not grammatical can give a feeling of like strangeness and fluidity to a poem, which I think this one really benefits from. You do the same with blood bones, right? We might say blood and bones to refer to the body, but saying blood bones gives like a different surreal kind of feeling. And I wonder if you could lean into like slight grammatical blips like this in the poem, maybe in like this section, because you're looking at streets and not understanding them, right? So you could make it like more surreal. Like this poem could probably be like more a linguistic reflection of Dali, and it might be cool. But I dare not, and I do not dare phantom trying to tame it. So the mind is something that cannot be tamed here. And phantom is a cool word here, right? It gives the feeling of the mind. It also gives the feeling of like the memory of the body. A phantom, a ghost, a thing that was once living, once a body, and has now become incorporeal. It has become a mind. And it's a cool. Like, I don't quite know what it says, but it gives the feeling of surreal. There's a ghost hanging over this poem now, and it's a melting clock, and it is also on a street of potholes. Like, it's sort of an absurd image. Those who claim to have tamed their hearts and minds, I believe, are lying. Or never had ones that worked in the first place. This is like a really funny sentence because we talk about how something works and we think about things that work or do not work, like machines, like bodies. They work or they don't. And like I'm not sure this is actually saying that like some people are fundamentally dysfunctional, right? But it's like a funny little callback to the machine. Those who claim to have tamed their hearts and minds, heart, the body, mind, the mind, I believe are lying. Now, the funny thing also is we've like established that this person doesn't necessarily believe anything they believe. They don't understand anything they think they understand. So in the same way, I think there's like a necessary uncertainty about believing they are lying. And I think this is something you need to like pay attention to in your poem, right? You set up an unreliable narrator. This is someone who tells us the story, but in ways cannot be trusted because of things that they've also established. So then anything you say that this like person believes in is fundamentally undermined by the fact that they don't actually know anything, right? Which is like awesome, right? And belief is a good word for it because it's like it's uncertain. It maybe supersedes knowledge. Belief is separate. It's also like a lot of times belief requires an imperfect knowledge, which then relates back very well, I think, to like, I wish I knew what I thought of any of it. I mean, the interesting thing is, this tells me what the subject thinks about it. That this is how it is, and there's a sort of acceptance in this line, comedic be it, of being uncertain. And so what do they think about it? They think that it's sort of painful, like dangerous, a hunt, but something they also accept, is what this poem says. For the mind is an animal, and the heart is a beast. We must fight not to be the prey. And you have like sort of two meanings here in the vagity, which I like. A beast hunts an animal, but also both an animal and a beast hunt people, because animal is vague, right? Animal looks lesser than beast, so it could say that the heart hunts the mind. But it can say that both the mind and the heart hunt the self, which makes this like a really cool conclusion, right? The whole system, the whole thing, the whole machine and not machine is hunting us. Hunts us. And we have to fight to not succumb to either the tension of both of them after us and against each other. I mean, maybe that's exactly it. That's how it's supposed to be. They're against each other, as we've seen, but because of that, they're also against us. And that's, like, really cool. I like this a lot, this ending, because it just kind of shows us in our lack of understanding and simultaneous pursuit of it as like the loser. And I'm going to run an ad, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to keep looking at this poem because I dig it. GhostlyAnnGraves. Here's the ad. Don't watch it. Self-care. I need to stretch. Welcome back. I'm still Ginny, still known as 2/3 Lotus, still known as the world's #1 hater of prose, which is why we're reading poetry. This is still Unknowing by GhostlyAnnGraves. We did a sort of initial pass, and now we will read it again. I wish I knew anything at all. No. That's wrong. Unknowing by GhostlyAnnGraves. I wish I knew anything at all. Whenever I think I know a street, there's a new pothole. With every epiphany is a new question. With every solution, there is a new problem. I wish I knew what I thought about any of it. I wish upon every star that sprinkles the endless sky like sand, that someday I might understand this machine beyond the blood bones. No magnifying glass can see the soul. No mirror can reflect thoughts. Perhaps we are the most foolish fools who ever fooled. Perhaps we are internally blind. But every time I think I understand the gears that turn my hopes and desires and fears and rages, I find that they were never cogs at all. Seems every time I blink, my mind is a new Salvador Dali painting waiting to be analyzed before it morphs again. And I do not dare phantom trying to tame it. Those who claim to have tamed their hearts and minds, I believe, are lying. Or never had ones that worked in the first place. For the mind is an animal and the heart is a beast. And we must fight, not to be the prey. So, Unknowing by GhostlyAnnGraves. I guess, GhostlyAnnGraves. I talked about the weirdness of the poem and how it feels like it could really lean into the Salvador Dali aspects. Is this something you're interested in? Because I think making a poem weird is harder than it seems. Unless you're me or High Caliber, then we just do it automatically all the time. But I don't, lots of people don't write weird poems that much. So we could talk about how to capture weirdness in a work, if that's something you want. Or if you have other questions. Or I can draw more graphs. I do enjoy strange fiction. Okay. So we can talk about weirdness in poetry. So, we need to still understand it, right? We don't want to be weird in an unintelligible way. And I think there are a few great ways to use weirdness. I don't know, I suppose I just wanted to see what the world thought about it. Oh, for sure. And I think it's very good. I think it does cool things. And I think it could be weirder if you wanted it to be weirder. I think it could lean into more mechanical metaphors with the machine and the cogs if we want it to go that way. It could stay just as is, right? If you just wanted the world to see it and see what they thought about it, then well, I've shown you what I think about it in many cases. But I do like to try to give some feedback and critique just because, well, it helps me be a better writer and helps you be a better writer. Much like the poem, I'm also unknowing. Sure. So I think, did you sort of come up with the title on the spot when I asked you? And do you like the title? Do you like it? You did, lol? I mean, that's fine. I think it's fitting. It is fitting. I wonder if it can be more expressive. Right? Never been great with naming things? Yeah. So here's the thing, my thing with titles is that sometimes you have a poem that has a very clear theme. Let's say I write a poem about grief. I find that titling the poem grieving or grief or sorrow, these sort of things, they certainly capture what the poem is going for and encompass it, but they don't tend to add something. And I really like a title that either adds something, makes us see the poem differently, or think a little different about the poem. I think it's just more fun and exciting that way for the reader, which makes Unknowing as a title for a poem about not knowing, like, not my favorite thing, right? It still works, but I think we might be able to work on it. And yeah, it adds another layer. So there are some things we could do, right? So one thing you can do in a poem is, let's say you have a line that you feel is very important. Instead of saying unknowing, which is just sort of a broad thematic description of our poem, we could take one line that we really want to highlight, that we feel captures the nature of the poem, right? And I'm not sure what that would be here, but that's one thing we can do, right? Take a single line. Or we can look at some of the stuff that, like, the poem implies and go beyond the text. You have gone beyond the text in Unknowing, but I think we can go beyond the text to add layers to this. Something that speaks to not knowing, or the dichotomy that we've created in this poem, or the hunt that is these two, like, animals, the mind and the heart. You could point to a part of the poem that wouldn't normally be looked at. You could talk about this as a hunt. A hunt both for, like, knowledge and a hunt also of, like, the mind and body consuming you. This could be an avenue for a title. You could talk about because, like, this is sort of a small part of the poem that I think is still very important because it comes to this conclusion, and maybe it points to your conclusion. We could have something related to, like, Dali and surrealism. This is another way we could do it. You could call the poem Melting Clock, and then your reader sees the title and conjures an image immediately of surrealism, of melting clocks, of what does that mean and what does that mean for this text? Why do melting clocks relate to this poem? Like, that's a way to do it. An extrapolation. You could do something sort of related to something in the poem, but, like, odd and taking a different direction. This is great for long titles. Driving, how would I name it if I wanted to use pothole? Like, I think the pothole is a great, like, image in this poem. But, like, sometimes poems have these, like, sprawling titles, and I like doing this sometimes. I have, like, a few of these. Some people do these. Let's, like, Charles Bukowski, To Jane, With All My Love, which could never be enough, or which was not enough, right? That's a very long title. Friendly advice to a lot of young men and a lot of old men too. So we can have, like, long titles. Potholes on Mind Avenue could be that indeed. I think that's kind of cool. I was thinking something, like, extremely mundane with the pothole. I think it would, like, somehow fit this poem to say, like, driving down insert street, and then, like, something about hitting potholes or potholes in front of you. I don't know. I don't think that's, like, great. But, like, potholes on Mind Avenue is kind of interesting, and it's fun. It's surreal. Like, Mind Avenue. And then why not, like, describe more of Mind Avenue and the weird stuff going on inside of your head. Like, I think that leans into some of like the surrealism. I like that a lot. And then even like whenever I think about a street, there's a new pothole. This is like deeply different from like with every epiphany, there's a new question. This talks about your actual process of thought. This is a metaphor. And we like metaphors because they like give images alongside thoughts. You're sorry you're like dead, high caliber? No worries. So in that way, you could describe other parts of mind avenue that keep changing. Houses, fences being repainted every time you look back at them. And then you just get this weird like dreamscape of like a normal sort of maybe suburban street melting around you because everything that you think you understand is reinvented every single freaking moment of your life. Like, it's dramatic. It's cool, right? And then it also juxtaposes like the banality of the street with potholes, with houses, with something that is, which I think is very like unchanging, very boring, very like nothing ever changes. I live in the suburbs, whatever. I talk about these things, and yet juxtaposes that with a world that is constantly in flux. Right, this could be a cool avenue if we're changing the poems. You love that, perfect. And then even things like every star, I wish upon every star that sprinkles the endless sky like sand. Like, this is good. Wishing is good, but your wishes aren't granted. So why not talk about like the star is changing too? Like the things that you wish upon, the things that are theoretically like going to help you, spit in your face and change, right? I think really, we've captured an idea that's very cool. You love it, I love it, it's cool. So why not make every single bit of the poem ooze with this surreal mind avenue, looking at a sky, and then the stars are doing something weird, moving, changing colors, nighttime, but it's like light outside or something. We can get really weird with it, right? Or like wishing upon stars that are actually like satellites. Like that would be such a cool, that would be really cool. Like I wish upon a star, and then like somehow saying that it's like this satellite looking back down at me. The fire hydrant was once red, but now it's blue. It isn't where it used to be. Yeah, exactly, something like that. This is the sort of thing that gives a feeling of every epiphany a new question, every solution a new problem, without telling us that, right? We've already told the reader, I wish I knew anything at all. And beyond that, I think everything we want can be a metaphor for it. This, of course, is if we're leaning into, like, the Dali. Maybe you look at some Dali paintings. Maybe you try to find direct inspiration from them. Throw a bone to your art critic readers, right? No magnifying glass can see the soul. No mirror can reflect thoughts. These are fine. These are like sort of banal objects, a magnifying glass and a mirror. Like, what about the reflection in the window or in like the tinted glass? Does not replicate my thoughts. Or like my face in the tinted glass window does not think. Just weird, right? It actually upheaves the emotion of the slipping insanity I greatly enjoy. Right, yeah. The more we get weird with it, the more it's gonna feel just absolutely deranged. Nasina, welcome. Thank you for the lurk. I'm glad to see you. I hope you were well. Perhaps every time I think I understand the gears turn, my hopes, desires, fears, and rages. And why not instead have those like melt instead of never be cogs at all? My brain is melting out of my ears and I don't know what to do about it. This is compelling. This is exciting, right? And phantoms, ghosts, sure. Like this makes sense if you're going crazy. And then this like primal feeling of like being hunted. Like this does something really, really cool. And I think this poem like will accomplish that with just a few tweaks, right? Some stuff here and here. And like most of this is fine. This could change, but like most of it is pretty like it's already hinting. Like I feel like this is what I'm getting from the poem. It wants to be like that. And you seem like you like the idea of getting a little feral, a little deranged with this poem, and I think it's a good poem to do that. Like you could definitely do something really cool with it. So there's that. Yeah. That. Any other questions, either regarding that or related to other things? Thank you so much. That was extremely helpful. I mean, we're not done yet. But I think that's like an approach we could take with this poem. And so you ask me, is this poetry in your Google form submission? I'm going to show the world the Google form. Does this count as poetry to you? Is what you said. And this is sort of me publicly shaming you, jokingly. Everything's poetry, GhostlyAnnGraves. But more so like, I think this speaks to maybe not to be presumptuous, but I'm going to presume, a vacuous space where confidence in this poem should sit in your mind, right? This was something I wrote at 2 a.m. after almost quitting writing. Good. That's the best time to write poetry. And I think, like you said, it was like you sort of getting back into poetry after a while, and I think it's so important to have confidence in our work, right? When it's framed immediately as like, does this count? It is sort of a self-deprecation or a deprecation of your own work. Maybe the work doesn't reflect you, right? It's a desperate attempt to write anything. Yeah, and that's kind of what poetry is a lot of the time. So to say like, yes, this is a poem that says something. If you can like make these statements, this is gonna like give you like, this is confidence. This is what is gonna help you as a poet, because you're a poet, GhostlyAnnGraves. You've written a poem, you've shared a poem, like you are a poet, right? And like so far, you do well. So confidence, I think, and I think that's also in the poem, right? Of course, it was sort of like a 2 a.m. fever dream, like written poem, and that's fine. But there's like this hint of wanting a little bit of like tearing at the seams, right? In this poem. Like, I can tell that you wanted to have something strange. Salvador Dali swirling in my mind, blood, bones, phantoms. Like, this is something you wanted to go for. And I think confidence in your poetry will allow you to take, like, the more bold steps in your writing and, like, immediately, instead of talking with, like, more general description, jump into like the cool metaphors of potholes on Mind Avenue, right? And I think it's a lot of it is confidence that gets you to a point where you can just, write a poem that is kind of deranged, or a poem that is extremely emotional, or a poem that is personal to you, right? Confidence is going to help those things come out. And I guess I'm like just trying to make sure like it's good. It's really good. And it also has really good ideas and really good opportunity to move forward, and that's exciting. So I want to see like more of it. That would be the question that no poet wants to answer. What is poetry? As Bakio said, what is poetry? You say as you stare into my pupil with your blue pupil, what is poetry? And you ask me, poetry is you. Yeah, I think the question of what is poetry and what counts is wild. Like I think anyone who's not a poet will say like, I don't know, it's like words that rhyme pretty much. And then the poets will get all poetic. Like you ask what is poetry and they write a poem for you to describe what is poetry, and it's like a vague thing, and a poetry can be whatever we call poetry. I like this societal definition. A poem is anything that is called a poem by someone. If someone calls it a poem, then like you can be pretty sure it's a poem, right? But I also like the everything is poetry, or experience is poetry, because experience is the communication of one's past to one's present to one's future, and this is the way that we create ideas in art or something. I don't know. And you say thank you, GhostlyAnnGraves. You're welcome. It's good. Yeah. Are you in our Discord, GhostlyAnnGraves? Is there anyone in chat? Pilsner Grip, are you in the Discord? Do any of you want to be in our Discord? Prose is my forte, so I greatly appreciate the feedback. I hate prose. I hate it because I'm bad at it, and I'm bad at analyzing it, and I struggle to write it because putting words into that way is hard. So this is so it's good to branch out. This is what we should do. And you do hope to dabble with more poetry. Please do. The world should have more of your poetry. The world should have more of my poetry. The world should have more of Raymond Du's poetry. Or his translations of poetry, perhaps. Don't hope to. Don't hope to dabble, GhostlyAnnGraves. Do it. Say, I am going to dabble with more poetry. You're a poet now. You can't escape it. It's over. I put the mind virus in your head, and now you're a poet, and you're gonna write poetry, and everything you're gonna do is poetic and poetry and stuff. Darn. Oh. Uh-oh. Got some resentment. Reluctance. A reluctant poet. Today I was reading an Argentine poet called Arturo Carrera, who talks about how to capture poetry from prose. Today I was reading, like double sent the message. How to capture poetry from prose. Interesting. That sounds like that sounds like something that would help me quite deeply. And I like reading prose. And sometimes I find poetry in prose. I find lines that are deeply beautiful. Well, thank you so much once more. But it's dinner time. You have a lovely night. Yeah, I think we're done with your analysis. So I'm going to read it one more time, GhostlyAnnGraves, and then we'll be done. So thank you so much for submitting. And here is Unknowing by GhostlyAnnGraves. I wish I knew anything at all, Whenever I think I know a street, there's a new pothole. With every epiphany is a new question. With every solution, there's a new problem. I wish I knew what I thought about any of it. I wish upon every star that sprinkles the endless sky like sand, that someday I might understand this machine beyond the blood bones. No magnifying glass can see the soul. No mirror can reflect thoughts. Perhaps we are the most foolish fools who ever fooled. Perhaps we are internally blind. But every time I think I understand the gears that turn my hopes and desires and fears and rages, I find that they were never cogs at all. It seems every time I blink, my mind is a new Salvador Dali painting waiting to be analyzed before it morphs again. And I do not dare phantom trying to tame it. Those who claim to have tamed their hearts and minds, I believe, are lying, or never had ones that worked in the first place. For the mind is an animal, and the heart is a beast, and we must fight not to be the prey. Unknowing by GhostlyAnnGraves. If you're still here, thank you so much for submitting. If you're not, then thank you so much for submitting. I hope you enjoy your dinner. You're still here. Thank you for watching. I encourage you to check out the rest of the series, follow if you enjoyed, and stop by Twitch if you want to share your own work. See you there.